Welcome to the Book Nook podcast.
Great to be diving into another book today.
Absolutely. And if today's discussion gets you interested, you can find a link to grab the book right there in the description below.
So today we're tackling The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This one's been massive, hasn't it?
Oh, huge. New York Times bestseller, Goodreads Choice Award winner back in 2019. It's popped up everywhere. Really popular in India, globally too.
Definitely. And it's clear from the listener feedback we got, which we're drawing on today, that it's a book people have strong feelings about.
Right. So our mission really is to unpack why. What makes this psychological thriller tick? We want to get into the core of it based on those listener sources and maybe have a few aha moments without, getting bogged down.
Exactly. Distill the essence, understand the buzz.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The story.
Right.
We've got Alicia Berenson. She's this successful painter, seems to have it all, but then she's accused of murdering her husband, Gabriel. He's a fashion photographer.
And the really chilling part, after the murder, Alicia just stops talking. Completely silent.
Yeah, that silence is the big hook, isn't it?
Totally. It creates this immediate mystery. And that's what pulls in Theo Faber. He's a criminal psychotherapist. And he becomes sort of fixated on her case. He actually maneuvers to get a job at the Grove, which is the secure psychiatric unit where Alicia is being held.
Just to work with her.
Pretty much. His whole goal, his driving motivation, is to get her to speak again. He believes, that her voice holds the key to what really happened that night.
Wow, okay. That's a heck of a setup. And you can see why it lends itself to exploring some deep themes.
Definitely. And listeners picked up on quite a few. Alyssa Clay, for instance, pointed out how the book delves into things like addiction, family trauma, and mental illness.
Which are pretty heavy topics on their own.
They are. And what's interesting is how they seem interconnected in the story. It's not just one thing. But then Hannah Zunik highlighted even darker elements.
Like what?
Things like abusive parents, the shadow of suicide, and self-harm attempts, gaslighting, even stalking. So it really goes into some murky psychological territory.
It sounds intense. And the way Michaelides handles this narrative, the writing style itself, seems to be a big draw for people.
Yeah, Alyssa Clay mentioned that specifically, called it intriguing, captivating, and really good at building that suspense. Keeps you hooked.
How does he actually structure it? Because that seems key.
Well, it's quite clever, actually. Most of the story unfolds from Theo's perspective, so we're seeing things through his eyes, getting his thoughts, his biases, maybe.
Okay, so we're in his head.
Right. But then we also get these excerpts from Alicia's journal, written before the murder.
Ah, so we get her voice, too, in a way.
Exactly, but only pieces. As the Indian booktuber noted, this kind of dual perspective, this careful doling out of information from both sides, it really ramps up the tension. The author's controlling what you know and when.
That makes sense. It keeps you guessing. What about the characters themselves? Did people connect with them?
It's mixed, as you might expect. Alyssa Clay felt they were generally well-developed, felt pretty real.
Okay, that helps ground the thriller elements.
True. But then you have Hannah Zunik's take. She apparently found Theo to be, well, her word was trash, kind of insufferable.
Okay, strong opinion there.
Yeah. So it shows how different readers react. Alicia, though, she remains this central puzzle. Because she's silent for so much of it, she's like this enigma at the heart of the story. We're focused on her, but we never feel like we fully know her.
The silence keeps her at arm's length, in a way. Fascinating. Let's talk about the pacing. How does the story move?
Hannah Zunik described it as a slow burn, which seems accurate. A lot of setup, atmosphere building.
So not exactly action-packed from page one.
Not necessarily. It seems like most of the really big moments, the reveals, are concentrated towards the end. It builds and builds.
And that build-up leads to the twist. Everyone talks about the twist.
Oh, yeah. The twist. Devin Trevorrow Flaherty called it a doozy, and Hannah Zunik said it just completely blindsided her. So for many readers, it clearly lands with a big impact.
That sounds like exactly what you want from a psychological thriller, that big aha, or maybe oh wow moment.
Right. But, and this is a big but, the ending is also where a lot of the criticism comes in. It seems to be quite divisive.
Okay, so how did people react negatively?
Well, Alyssa Clay expressed some disappointment, maybe felt a bit disjointed, or that the timeline didn't quite add up perfectly, like it was maybe rushed, needed a bit more explanation to feel totally satisfying. Hannah Zunik and the Indian booktuber echoed some of that too, a sense that maybe it felt a bit forced or didn't quite feel earned after the build-up.
So the surprise was there, but maybe the logic behind it felt shaky to some.
That seems to be the crux of it for the critics. A good twist needs to surprise you, sure, But it also needs to make sense in hindsight, fit the pieces together. If it feels like it comes out of nowhere or ignores earlier parts of the story, that can leave readers feeling a bit let down.
Right, even if they were initially shocked, it needs that retrospective click.
Exactly. And beyond the twist itself, Devin Trevorrow Flaherty also mentioned that some readers felt there were plot threads or subplots that kind of got introduced
Yeah.
and then just fizzled out.
Oh, like loose ends.
Yeah, leaving unanswered questions, which can be frustrating in a mystery. You want that sense of resolution, mostly.
Okay, makes sense. Now, what about just liking the characters? You mentioned Theo being called trash.
Uh-huh, yeah. And apparently, Devin Trevorrow Flaherty mentioned some readers ended up disliking most of the characters by the end, including the main ones.
Wow, okay. That's quite a statement.
It is. But maybe that's intentional sometimes. Authors create flawed people. On the other hand, the Indian booktuber expressed real sympathy for Alicia, despite everything. So again, wildly different connections.
It really shows how subjective reading is. Now, here's something interesting, because Devin Trevorrow Flaherty brought up the portrayal of psychology itself.
Ah, yes. The criticism that maybe the depiction of therapy, psychiatry, mental illness wasn't very realistic.
Yeah, and potentially could even reinforce some harmful stereotypes.
That's a really important point. When fiction tackles mental health, there's a responsibility there, isn't there? Even with creative license, you want to avoid misrepresentations that could be damaging.
Definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And just quickly, circling back to the ending, despite the intended shock, some readers apparently saw it coming.
Yeah, Devin Trevorrow Flaherty noted that too. For some, the clues may be added up a bit too neatly before the actual reveal.
Which would obviously lessen the impact of the twist.
For sure. It's that tricky balance for the author planting clues without making it too obvious. A real tightrope walk.
One other element people picked up on was the use of mythology.
Oh, right. The Greek mythology references. Both the Indian booktuber and Devin Trevorrow Flaherty mention this, particularly the story of Alcestis.
How does that fit in?
Well, Alcestis is a figure from Greek myth who sacrifices herself for her husband, but there are layers to her story. Silence, return from death. It adds the symbolic depth, another layer for readers to sort of interpret the main story through. It's a neat literary touch.
That does sound like an interesting layer. Okay, before we wrap up our thoughts, if you're enjoying this kind of deep dive, please do consider subscribing to the Book Nook podcast.
Yeah, we explore lots of different books and topics, and leaving a review really helps other book lovers find the show. We appreciate it.
We really do. So putting all this together, it sounds like The Silent Patient, despite some definite criticisms, especially around that ending, it still delivers a really gripping, powerful experience for a lot of people.
I think that's fair to say. Alyssa Clay and the Indian booktuber both suggested it's a really engaging read, especially if you're a fan of the genre, the psychological thriller.
But maybe go in prepared for an ending that might make you think, or even argue about it afterwards.
Exactly. As Alyssa wisely put it, manage expectations around the ending, perhaps. Know that it's a point of discussion.
It definitely seems like a book that generates conversation.
No doubt about it. And that's often the sign of something interesting, isn't it? Even the criticisms show it made people think and react strongly.
It really does. Well, this has been a really fascinating look at all the different facets of The Silent Patient.
Agreed. It's clear Michael Ides created something with a compelling hook and a lot of suspense, even if, parts of the resolution didn't land perfectly for everyone.
So for you listening, we definitely encourage you to pick up the book if you haven't already. Form your own opinion.
Yeah, see where you fall on that spectrum of reactions, and maybe that leads us to a final thought to leave you with.
Ooh, okay.
Considering how varied the reactions are to this book, especially its twist, what do you think are the essential ingredients for a truly satisfying twist ending in a thriller? What makes it work for you?
That is a great question to mull over. Food for thought. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into The Silent Patient here on the Big New Podcast.
Yes. Thank you for listening to the Book Nook podcast. And don't forget, that link to get your own copy of the book is right there in the description.